Date with a Debut is a Words and Nerds and Breathe Art Podcasts co-production recorded on a Wagbical country. And I pay my respects to all elders, past and present, and extend that to any First Nations people tuning in. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. On with the show.
I was raised in a very large family. I was one of 10, but I was the only adopted child. I didn't know my black dad at all. I just knew that my dad was black and I had a white mum. But having 4 kids also, it just helps in terms of just write kind of naturally about that stuff.
Welcome to Date with a Debut, a podcast about debut authors, their incredible books, and their journey to publication. If you are looking for a new author to discover or writing inspiration for your own story and you don't know where to start, this is the place to be. I'm Nick Wasiliev, author of When Men Cry and your host for today's show, and I'm delighted to welcome another debut author in today's episode. If you enjoy the show, or indeed any other shows on the Words and Nerds platform, jump online and give us a thumbs up, a 5-star review, wherever you are listening. Thank you for listening to us and for supporting the Australian book industry. You can also find any books mentioned in today's podcast down in the description. Today, I'm joined by Anton Clifford-Motopi, formerly a teacher, health researcher at a university, and also the author of 3 children's books that still are in his drawer. We're here today to talk about his middle grade debut, To and Fro, published by Allen and Unwin, which you can buy now down in the description. We will discuss mild spoilers, so I recommend getting a copy now, or at least very soon. I started by asking Anton about his journey to this book, and additionally, his extraordinary career. Anton, welcome to Date with a Debut.
Thank you, Nick. Great to be here.
I just want to start by saying, wow, I feel like normally with this podcast, I kind of dive into the stories of the author and how they actually came to their writing journey. But I kind of need to start with you because your career and your life trajectory is extraordinary. We were just talking about it before we started recording. Former teacher, you're a university lecturer, health researcher. You have written several children's books that have now remained in a drawer until you got to To and Fro. You like doing everything, don't you? It's a great, incredible story.
Well, I think it's more about really trying to find out what it is that I really want to do. And so I think that the teaching thing kind of came about because at school I was my 2 best subjects were actually English and health and phys ed. And so when I left school, I thought, well, let's just do teaching, and I'll pick those 2 things that I was best at school. And so that's what I did. And so I ended up teaching those 2 things, HP as a major and English as a minor. And I taught for 3 years, 2 years in Mount Isa and 1 year in Brisbane at Kelvin Grove High School. And I guess probably it was the teaching English in Mount Isa where the seed for the writing was probably planted, because I was given a year 9 English class, and back then they used to stream kids after year 8. So like year 8 was the first year of high school back then. And so they'd stream kids based upon their marks in, English, maths and science in year 8. And so at the school I was at, if you were in year 9A, you were like, top of the class kind of thing, and then went down B, C, D. So I was given, I think it was 9D English class, probably 90% male, and just boys that didn't want to read at all or be there. And so it was a real struggle to find them books that would actually engage them, and books that would kind of hold their interest as well. And I had a bit of moderate success with Paul Jennings' books and his short stories, such as Cow Dung Custard, I think was the one that they really liked. And it kind of got me thinking whether this is something that I could kind of do, and I like that kind of, funny kind of book as well. But at that point, I really didn't do, anything with it at all. And then after teaching, I I taught at TAFE for about a year and then went back and did a master's in health, in public health. And that was sort of my transition into like academia, basically, and then, doing a PhD. But in terms of the writing, when I really started to kind of focus on that and really think, look, I'll give this a decent shot, was when I was in a bookstore and I was looking to buy my daughter a book, who at the time I think would have been about 13 or 14. And I can actually recall that I think it was actually Kmart. And so it was a book kind of section of their Kmart. And I was looking at books and I picked up a John Marsden book, and it was one of the first books he wrote. I think it was called So Much to Tell You, I think. And I was flicking through it. And as you do, you think, oh, yeah, I could write this. Like you foolishly think that because it just looks so straightforward and simple. But that's why it's also so good as well. And then when you sit down and you actually start to kind of do it, you realize that it's not that simple at all. And so there were many years there of just kind of writing stuff without really knowing kind of like what I was kind of doing. And it was all longhand as well. But there was sort of bits and pieces of stories that kind of went kind of nowhere. And then I'd kind of, like shove that aside and start like something else and that. And then eventually I kind of landed on a story that I thought, would actually work. And I finished it basically, and I sent it off. But it was really a story more about me kind of masquerading as fiction, I guess. However, it did get a lot of interest. It got interest from a place called Black Dog Books, which I think now is called Walker Books. And I actually met with someone from there, and they were really interested. But I think it was the uniqueness of the voice which really kind of captured them and sort of, like hooked them in. And they wanted me to kind of like change the story and update it because it was set back when I was a kid. And they sort of felt that, kids don't really want to read back unless it's sort of linked, like to some kind of, historical event or something like that. So I updated the book, also had to reduce it in length as well. And, they kind of said, oh, look, we just feel that the voice that was in that first book has gone. You kind of lost that voice. And so it just went kind of nowhere. So that was, a lesson learned. And then I wrote a couple more as well. But I wasn't very good at sending things off. I think over the years, I probably have sent 3 books off to maybe 7 or 8 places, and that's it. So, I wasn't really good at sending off books. And, as well, like in this time I had kids. I've got 4 kids. I had kids and I was doing a PhD as well. So there's all this other stuff kind of going on. So it was very much like a pastime hobby type of thing. And that's kind of been my kind of journey, I guess, to get to this point now. And I just got to a point where I thought, well, you've got to really kind of make a push for this now if it's what you really want to do. And it's that thing, I think, writing is that thing, is if you can talk yourself out of it, you're not meant to be doing it. And over the years I tried to talk myself out of it, but I just kept on doing it and doing it and doing it. So I thought, well, obviously you're meant to do this. And so let's just do it, properly now.
And you certainly have done it with this beautiful book. Obviously, for everyone who's kind of watching the video, I've got the ARC up, but To and Fro is this beautiful book. Give us your 1-minute pitch for what To and Fro is about.
Oh, the 1-minute pitch, gosh. So basically, To and Fro is about a boy named Sam. He lives with his white mum. He knows he has a black dad, but he's never met his black dad at all. And Sam, he very much sees himself as the weird-looking white kid with an afro, which is how others also see him. And then Sam meets his black dad, and that just opens up a whole load of questions for him. So things like, am I half black and half white? Am I a white kid with a black dad? Am I a black kid inside white skin? And Sam reaches a point where he really feels he wants his outsides to match how he feels about himself, like on the inside, now that he's met his dad. And so the book really explores that journey. And I guess Sam's, trying to find out what it actually truly means to be Sam.
Great. Love it. You couldn't have nailed it any better. And, I'm really excited to have you on the show, because I haven't had the pleasure of doing a lot of YA. I've done a few episodes, but definitely not a lot of middle grade and younger age books on the show. And I love where the space that children's books is in right now. There are a lot of authors tackling a lot of challenges around society, things like race, sexuality, families. They tackle them head on. And, growing up with, books like that, I know it definitely had an impact on how I see the world. And I think it is certainly the case with To and Fro, because you cover the complex race dynamics of being light-skinned with a black identity in Australia, which is a very complicated space. You've got family dynamics, what makes a family. You tackle self-confidence, expression. And I kind of immediately, off the top of my head, thought, how hard is it to straddle those lines of having those themes, but also telling a story that has the focus of being for children?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say that, I did this and that, X, Y, Z kind of thing. But to be honest, I just basically wrote the book. And I think a lot of what I had experienced obviously came out as well. So I was raised in a very large family. I was one of 10, but I was the only adopted child. I didn't know my black dad at all. I just knew that my dad was black, and I had a white mum, birth mum, and a black dad, birth dad. So I certainly had that to kind of draw on in terms of the book. As well, having 4 kids, and I had my first child when I was very young, 20 years of age. So having 4 kids also, it just helps in terms of, being able to kind of just write kind of naturally about that stuff and family and kids and stuff like that. And then, of course, being a teacher helps to kind of write about those things at school as well. So, it is that old, adage of write about what you know. And I think that's probably what has kind of come kind of through in it. But you're right in that there were times where there were scenes in the book where I was sort of wondering whether I should kind of go there, and you can guess which of those ones.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, I kept asking myself, one, is there anything in here that I haven't experienced, or I don't know someone personally who actually has? And then 2, I felt that I kind of had a kind of a right to kind of write about these things, because it comes from that kind of that kind of lived experience. And so, and I felt that I had the knowledge and the understanding to do those things in a sensitive way, and like an honest, authentic way as well.
It comes through in this actual story, and going back to the point that you kind of mentioned earlier about with previous books, how you struggled to find the voice. I think the voice that you've captured here of Sam is magnificent, because there is an honesty that you touched on, that honesty and authenticness that kind of came through in the story. There is a real honesty about writing for children. There is kind of a line that, little children and senior citizens don't lie. They tell you exactly how they are feeling about your piece of work. And I saw in an interview that you did, I think it was with Good Reading magazine, where you talked with your daughter, and that she said that, I wish my outside matched my insides. And for me, that's it. There is the space that this story and this book can exist. And it's really hard to, and it's not fair to put books in a box or anything like that, because of course the book is about so much more than that. But you captured that brilliantly with this voice, this character, and these themes and stories fantastically. And it was wonderful. I loved this book. It was a really, really huge joy.
And that's where the actual story, I guess it was always there, but that's where it kind of sprung from. So I was in South Africa visiting family, and my kids were there as well, and it was actually their first time over there. So it was huge for them, to see, family and where they're from and everything like that. And it just had such a profound impact on how they kind of started to see who they are, as well. And she made that comment shortly afterwards, and it just got me thinking on a couple of levels. And I guess it just made me realize that the things that I kind of struggled with when I was a kid, I just assumed that my kids wouldn't kind of have that same kind of struggle now. One, because, times have changed a lot. Two, because I grew up in a very, white area, so I kind of, I stood out. And they, they were in Sydney for 16 years, inner West, culturally mixed, lots and lots of friends from different nationalities. And yet they were still kind of grappling with this stuff. And, in spite of the fact that they also had their parents who they, had as well, and who they could talk to about these things as well. And it just made me realise that, there's kids out there now these days who still kind of grapple with that stuff.
Absolutely, and this is a reason why I think this book is going to work so well for them. There are a lot of characters I really want to go deeper into with this book. But if I could, we would truly be here all day, because I would pick your brain endlessly about it. But I have to start with Sam, of course, our protagonist, who really gets thrown for a loop by this very significant event of his father surprising him, a surprise visit. Has never met, arrives and really gets him in this state of grappling with who he is. And timing couldn't have been more perfect, considering he also has an assignment that picks up perfectly on this, to add to that crisis of identity. And of course, there's other challenges of the annual community concert as well. But he's such a sweet kid, Sam is. He's such a sweet kid, and I don't know why I found myself feeling protective of him almost reading this. And maybe, that's my own projection on the character and on the text. But he is such a fun kid. He's hilarious. This is a fun story. I laughed out loud several times. I love this kid. I love this. This is the frame and the lens by which we examine this story. I have no comment to add. I love Sam. I think he's fantastic.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I must say that, the actual character of Sam, I do owe something to Alan and Unwin, who I kind of, obviously worked with on this book as well. So the original version of this book was almost close to half of what it is now. And so it was really kind of working on fleshing out that. And they were great in terms of being able to point out those kind of areas that, I had to work on and kind of flesh out characters and things like that. I think Sam was kind of always there in terms of how he is now. But when I think back to the first version, I think he wasn't as likable and lovable. He was a bit too sarcastic. He was a bit kind of whiny. And that he was still funny, but it wasn't as balanced as he is now. And so it was great to be able to kind of get him to that point and tap into those sort of, parts of him. And I guess that was just also exploring, that fact that he is quite vulnerable as well, and bringing those things out in him too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that vulnerability is something that I think a lot of people would be drawn to. Because of that vulnerability, we're able as an audience to engage with him so much more when his world gets flipped on its head and he goes through these crises of identity. I would love to also ask you about his friends as well, but I think I would rather focus on the dynamic you have in terms of his family. Of course, you have his dog Trevor. You have his mother, you have Nana, and of course his dad. Just tell me a little bit about setting that up and also those characters and the significance to Sam as our protagonist.
Yeah, so if I'll start with the dog first of all. And actually, Trevor came into the story because I'm not really into pets. So I never thought I'd actually have like a pet like in a story. But I've got a daughter and she actually has a dog who was called Trevor, a Labradoodle, except he's bigger and he's black. And he's probably one of the few dogs I've met that I actually like. And when she brings him over here, he's sort of, I don't know, he just sort of feels like a person and he's just kind of chilling out and everything like that. So he was kind of a cool kind of character. And I thought, oh, he'd make a cool kind of character like in a book. And I thought, well, let's just keep him as a dog. And for Sam, I thought it was also important because he is an only child to have kind of like someone else there who he can kind of lean on in those kind of hard times, you know, like when he doesn't want to go and see his mum or whatever. So that's kind of how he kind of came about. The others in the book were really, Sam's mum, I mean, generally with a character, I'll start with like one or two traits. And I think with her, I started with the trait where she basically laughs at everything. And from there, you know, it just kind of helps me then sort of think, well, what other aspects has she got to her, you know, her personality that kind of fits that. And so it was just kind of like, I guess, bringing in those sort of, you know, like aspects as well. And as the writer, in my head, I've got a backstory for her. You don't actually know it all because it's through Sam's eyes and he's not going to always, you know, talk about it. But I know her backstory in terms, you know, like of the reasons why she wouldn't have told Sam's dad straight away. And some of that kind of relates to her mother as well and her kind of, you know, racist attitudes and things like that. So that just helps me when I'm kind of, I guess, writing her like on the page, if I know that backstory. And the same with the Nana as well, you know, like knowing her backstory as well. And I felt that it was important that, you know, she had experienced a loss recently because that then, you know, in turn makes her quite protective of Sam as well. Yeah, so I think that's how those kinds of characters come about. And Sam's dad, it was interesting because in the very early version, the feedback I got was that he was just too perfect and there were no flaws. You know, I remember a publisher saying, you know, like he's a pediatric surgeon, he's this, he's that. And I thought, yeah, okay, then, you know, like he's a bit too kind of, you know, perfect, ideal. And then it was sort of thinking through how might he kind of react in this kind of situation. And in terms of what does actually happen with him, I actually put myself in his position, you know, as a male around a similar age and thinking, well, you know, how might I kind of react and what kind of challenges I might have, you know, with this new son that's come into my life. And once I did that, I was then able to, I guess, see, you know, sort of, I guess, bring out some of those flaws in him, I guess.
Yeah, it's a fantastic dynamic. And kind of going back to a point that you mentioned a little bit, I think one of the things I love that you've achieved with this book is that that voice is still front and center of Sam, because, I mean, part of me had thought, you know, initially that there would, having his dad as this perfect figure might not have been totally out of character because it's the first time experiencing and meeting another parent, the other parent. But there's a childlike element to touching on these heavier topics that I really came to appreciate, and that where I could start to pick up on the small subtext and other stories of these characters. Sam is beginning to engage with these concepts of his own identity, of his race, of understanding at a young age. And kids will be kids. He's 12. I love that because, you know, he's as an adult like you and me. I mean, I can identify with those subtexts and, you know, things that are implied because, you know, the more adult nature of that, because we've lived it, we've experienced it, we've had more time on this world to process it. And I love that Sam remains the focus, which is why I think, you know, even if, you know, in this space, kids will pick up on stuff, but you can come back to it later, to a text later and realize, oh, this is what was implied and what is meant. And no spoilers about the ending. We will stay spoiler-free. I do not want any spoilers for the ending of this book. Go and buy it, everyone. But his journey is just a very compelling story. And with that all put together, just wow, it's a very compelling ending.
Thank you. Thanks.
So, as a next point that I kind of want to go and talk on about, because you've already kind of written many children's books that kind of never made it to this level of publication, I just want to quickly ask you about your journey to publication. Was there anything that surprised you in that process with Alan and Unwin?
Yeah, look, I mean, so the actual timeline of events and the actual journey. So they have this thing which is called a Friday pitch, where you send in your synopsis and I think the opening chapter. So I sent that in. It would have been in mid 2021, and then if they like what they read, well, then they get back to you within a fortnight, which they did. And then I said in the whole manuscript, and then I heard back from them about 3 or 4 months later, and they were interested, but it was Christmas, and so I had to wait until the following year. And then I spoke with them over the phone, and they were really keen, but they felt that the book needed more work. And so we talked through for about an hour where they thought it could actually go. I didn't agree with everything because I felt it was trying to put too much into this particular story. And I wanted that the focus to be on just Sam, you know, being fair-skinned and having, you know, but, you know, I guess, and wanting to be black, basically. I just wanted the focus to be on that. I felt that anything more would just be a bit kind of too much. And so I went away, and then I thought about it for about a week, and then I emailed them and I said, look, this is what I plan to do. And they were like, great, sounds great. And then I probably in the June of 2022, I sent them the updated manuscript, and they loved it. They took it to a meeting, and then I got the offer in August of 2022. And this is a bit where I had no idea about, because I looked at it and I just saw March, okay? And I was actually overseas at the time in South Africa, and I just saw March, and I thought, gosh, what? It's going to be like 7 or 8 months until it comes out. That's ages. So I took a screenshot to my daughter. I sent it to my daughter, and I said, yeah, you know, it's not coming out until March next year. And she's like, Dad, no, it says March 2024. And I'm like, what? You know, and they're like, are you kidding me? I was just like, so it was just that timeline. That is what kind of surprised me. But I must say that time has gone extremely quickly, given the work that has been done on that book in that time. So once that happened, it was then, you know, you get this contract, and I didn't know anything about the contract. I'm reading this stuff, and that was the next thing, this contract and the offer, and I don't know, is this good or bad? It's all this stuff. Like, what does it mean? So I raced around, and I managed to get an agent, Catherine Drayton from Inkwell Management, and I was just lucky. She was actually flying back from the States, and she said, look, just email the manuscript to me, and she read it on her flight back. And then I had a Zoom call with her on the Monday, and I was still in Africa. I think at that time, where was I? Botswana, actually. Yeah, Botswana of all places, which was kind of like, you know, weird. So she's in Sydney, I'm there, I'm having this kind of Zoom call, and then, yeah. So once they'd signed me, then she took over everything. You know, worked like through it. It then went through a copy edit toward the end of the year, toward the end of 2022, and then they gave it to another editor in the May of 2023, and it went through another round, and that round was a lot more interventionist, and that was the round where I probably learned a lot about, writing and editing and things like that. Interestingly enough, there were very few structural edits, which was great. So that was the process, and then I think the other thing that kind of like I guess threw me at the end was you go through this copy edit stage, you learn so much, and then you have to let the book go.
Yes.
No. Can I just apply all this stuff I've learned now to this book? Can I hold on for a couple more months? Because I can see now, and they're like, no, it's fine, Anton, it's ready. Let it go. And so, and you just have to, let it go and then apply that onto your next book. So that was the process, basically.
It goes off and has a life of its own. That's the thing. It's like a child. It's exactly like a child. It goes off and has a life of its own. And at some point you've got to say goodbye, which is incredibly difficult.
But if I will say one thing is that even after you say bye and you sort of want the book in a way to kind of be dead to you in a way, and then you can move on.
Yes.
You have all this media now where they're asking you about the book and you have to talk about it. And you're like, which is great. So it doesn't end really, you know what I mean? Like you still have to kind of engage around this book and talk about this book. Yeah. And that. So, yeah.
I think the good way to describe it is it'll always be a part of you. It's just another part of you that is taking on another life of its own and is traveling around. And you won't know where it goes. And that's kind of the magic of it. You will just, one day you'll the day that you come across a library, like a random library in I don't know, you might be back in South Africa or in in that part of Africa, and there it is. It's just sitting there, and that book has had its own little journey to get there.
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah, those are the moments where you absolutely pinch yourself. It's incredible. On that topic, you mentioned that for the next book, what will we see next?
So I am working on something. Let's just say it's got the same themes, but it's not really dealing with race. It's more dealing with identity, family, those same kind of themes, and also a middle grade fiction as well. So that's what I'm hoping is next, or that's what I'm working on now. So we'll see where that kind of goes. And I always sort of had a second story in mind for To and Fro as well. That's kind of sitting there, and we'll just see what happens with like this one and whether or not it then leads to a second book. Because Sam's journey certainly isn't over at this point. I don't feel it is. I never did. Like when the book was finished.
Yeah. You always kind of get a sense of if it's like when you are ready to say goodbye to a character. I think that can feel a bit more final. A character can be just as they are in a story, but if there is more to tell, you can feel that it's there. That's always very exciting. How exciting! Oh, maybe another one. Oh, wow. Okay, I'm going to need to.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, hopefully down the track.
Well, now at the final part of the show where I fire off a bunch of rapid fire questions at you, and you literally give me the first answer that comes to your head.
Oh, wow. Okay. This could be scary. Scary for you.
Well, fortunately, we kind of kick off with bookie questions. I like to ease you in nice and easily. And the first question I want to ask is, what is your favorite book that you've read in the last year?
I'd say there's two. I'd say The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, and I'd say the second book in the Chaos series by Patrick Ness, The Ask and the Answer. I think those are probably the two favourites I've read this year.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, Patrick Ness is great. Really,
He is,
really
yeah.
good. Is there a favourite debut novel? Do you have a favourite debut novel that you've ever read?
I do, and it's been the same one forever. I read it when I was a kid, and it is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I was obsessed with that book when I was obsessed with that book when I was a kid, and I don't know why, but I read it so many times, and I love the film as well. I was just obsessed with it for some reason. So that is my favourite debut novel.
Yeah, ditto. Me too. That is my absolute favourite debut novel. I think it's incredible. I don't know why I got obsessed with it too, to an obscene degree. And I think in my head, what I've boiled it down to is that at its core, what Atticus Finch is striving for is, in the times that he's in, where such common sense ideas are so disregarded. He's that voice of what could be, in a way. What he's striving for is, because we look at it with our contemporary lens, we often are like, well, he's not asking for much here. He's asking for people to be treated equally. But the way he just sells it as such a compelling statement in that closing statement in the courtroom, and then the fact that Tom Robertson is still guilty anyway, highlights why he does what he does, because it needs change. Unbelievable story. I don't know. Maybe that's my connection with it now. I still need to read Go Set a Watchman.
I've read that years ago.
I need to read it. I just haven't got around to it. But I've been meaning to.
Good. Yeah. Yeah.
What is one lesson that you know now that you wish you could go back and tell your own 12-year-old self?
Oh, that's a good one. I think it would be that it's okay to be who you want to be, and you don't have to be, how others kind of see you, or what others kind of see you as. I think that is the key. I think, but at that age, it's very hard to do that, because all you want to do is fit in. And so if you don't have anyone around you who is, I guess, like you, or like who you can see yourself in, it's extremely hard to do that. But that's probably what I would say to myself.
Great. I like that. Do you have a favourite word?
I'd say I've got two. I'd say sanguine. I just like how it sounds. And the other one is my favourite because my daughter hates it, and that is the word cluster. So whenever I say it, she kind of shudders and shivers. I was just like, cluster. She's like, Dad, stop it. It's like I'm kind of torturing her or something. But yeah, I'd say sanguine.
Oh, love it. On the subject of your daughter, what do your kids think of Sam? And if he was real, would they be friends with him?
Well, you know what? I've only one of them has actually read the book. I've got three daughters and a son. They're all adults. My girls and my son is almost 12, and only the eldest has actually read the book. The second eldest is a massive reader, and I think she will actually read the book. I've given her a copy. My son, I don't know. I think I'll have to force him to read the book, or I've given his teacher a copy with the aim that they might do it in class, and therefore he has to read the book, and then his dad can come up and give an author talk and really, really embarrass him. So he's in year 6.
I love that's where your focus is. I want to get him. I want to get him at school.
Yeah, but no, look, I think they would. I think they would like Sam, and there's probably a little bit of one or two of them in Sam, and then the other character, I'd say definitely there's some of my daughter in Charlie.
Yes.
as well,
Yeah.
Charlie as well. Yeah, because my kids, they have my South African side, and then their mother is actually Aboriginal, so they've got that mix, that kind of real mix. So, and they all choose to, I guess, identify in different ways as well, so, which is interesting. Yeah.
That's a great answer. I love it. Do you think you'll go back to Africa again soon? And do you think there's another story that there could be there from your time there?
Yeah, look, I always want to go back there. I was there a couple of years ago, and my dad is still there, family is still there. I've got sisters there as well, nephews, cousins. So yeah, certainly head back. And yes, I do see part of a story being set over there. That's probably a big hint if I was to write a second book.
I say no more.
Yeah.
And last question, because I mean, I know that a lot of this book is also drawn from your own lived experience, and I often wonder, of a lot of authors, they pull from that sort of lived experience, and I think committing it to the page in some way, shape, or form often can make you recontextualize and look at your own lived experiences with new, fresh approaches, or in ways that you may have understand in new ways that would be separate from what you would have beforehand. So I wonder, what did writing this book teach you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess. So I guess there's kind of like two things. So I guess it kind of draws on things that I have been through in terms, of some of the situations that like Sam is in, or some of the things that are actually said to him as well. But there's also a lot of it is where what Sam does is perhaps what I would have liked to have been able to do as a kid. You know what I mean? Have had that kind of courage to kind of do as a kid that I just, I didn't have. But a part of what gives him that kind of, I guess, is others as well kind of give him that courage too. So I think in that way, it's probably taught me that in these kinds of situations, just how it's really important to have that kind of support network, around you, and don't be afraid to kind of like use that and lean on that, because, obviously Sam actually has that, in terms of his friend Aiden, in terms of what he learns from Charlie and his dad. So I think I would say that.
That's a great answer, and it's good that it's telling this story was educational for you, as it will be hopefully for many people who will read it. Thank you so much, Anton, and just thank you for this gift. This is a wonderful book.
Thank you for reading it.
Yeah, I have no doubt that this book will do really, really well. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Nick.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Date with a Debut, and for listening to the Words and Nerds channel. You can buy all books mentioned in today's episode down in the description box, and if you enjoyed the show, or indeed any episode of Words and Nerds, drop us a review, leave us 5 stars or a thumbs up. It is hugely appreciated. Catch you soon.